All right, we're back. This is the third game between these two fine players. Seto leads 1-0, having won the Brotherhood of Seed rule set, and now his first turn here. I'm sort of getting a feeling that the way Seto Smokes matches go is that Smokes will always create chances, but is unlikely to convert, and whenever Seto gets a chance, he will. Now, what I really want to talk about, though, is what I really misevaluated in the last game because I think it's interesting and I think it's something I should work on. And thus, when there's something where you have a mistake, I think it's really important to try to verbalize it to yourself as well as possible and as usefully for thinking about it in the future, such that it's something when you see something similar again, it will click, oh, yes, that's connected. You want to give your brain as many chances to make connections as possible. So I think like the player that makes a mistake or makes a misevaluation and doesn't talk about it, doesn't want to think about it, as I've often done. Sorry about that noise. I will pause for a second. What was I saying? Something about the better we can verbalize, the better chance we have to make connections and to think more about it. And we don't even need to like solve it or make, a study unit for ourselves about it. Not that anyone other than me would do these things. But you want to give yourself a way to make connections around it, a way to think about it. And what I think is the case is in closed, I am very attuned that 5 is essentially the pivot card. The game will really often revolve around controlling 5, comboing through 5. 5 starters are very common. Playing next to it with a weak number facing it is fairly common. Playing next to it with a move balanced it with it, the same as it, is very common simply to stop 5 from having as much pivot force. I was going to say, I kind of like the idea of Smokes playing near their starter because I think 3299 could end up being a pretty dead card. So I like this approach from Smokes. I think if he just continues to capture things, there's a chance that Seto will never find a moment to play 3299, and that could leave Smokes with a promising position. Also, 7, 8, 6, 5, and 2 walks into, I think, a pretty relevant combo. 8, 5, 6, 7, and 2, and 3, 2, 9, 9, and 2 do not capture, and 6, 8, 7, 5, and 2. Well, that looks like the move to play, right? It does give up control of 9, so maybe Smoke's idea is 9, 4, 3, 9, and 9 there. But maybe he can go 1. He doesn't even need that high out facing necessarily, because again, if he can make 3, 2, 9, 9 a dead card at the end, you can kind of fall behind a little structurally. So I think that's the idea. Food just came out for me, so I'm going to be pausing a bunch between things, and the game might skip around a bit, but oh well, what can we do? All right, this kind of skipping around recording is going to make it harder for me to give extensive lines. I'll try not to do every time I unpause or pause like an intro to it because it could be saying things, right? It could be interesting. You don't need to know about this. Now, of course, I've spent a bunch of time on that, but I wanted to get back to the other point. I think enclosed 5 is often a very obvious pivot point. And if there are other pivot points, they're often only kind of notable to one player, right? You start with a big corner and you find, oh, it's really uncomfortable to play around that. And the other player doesn't really know that you can't and probably won't play as if you can't. But it can be really annoying to play next to it because you're so afraid of combos. So I tend to avoid certain kinds of big corners for a straightforward reason. And I think what you see in a lot of closed, right, is 5 is that pivot point. 5 is the square that you have to be very conscientious of what is strong to it, what is weak to it, when can it be comboed, what do you have in return. In open, I tend to be very focused on corners as pivot points, right? A lot of games start with, a corner starter and then a move in 5, and right, say 1 and then 5, right? 2 and 4 are these obvious combo squares. And usually play revolves around what the corner can do, not what the center card can do, right? Usually the corner is the thing with big out facing that's hard to deal with. And that can be a real thing. But I think if you look at my games, And I think it's reasonable to identify corners as the most likely kind of pivot. Ooh, Seto finds a way to get 3299 out of his hand. Very creative fashion. What a move. Saying, you're 4895 and 2, I have combo against. Your other cards I can take as needed. I'd be very tempted to play 6, 5, 7, 8, and 2 if I was Smokes. That seems a hard move to turn down. But rather than look at this incredibly interesting move on the board, I'm going to keep babbling about what I'm babbling about. Is there some big setup in a... maybe the point is, if something like 6, 5, 7, 8, and 2, maybe Seto wants like 8, 5, 6, 7, and 8. That would be fun. Stuff's going down in this game. This game's going to be interesting. But okay, rather than again look at the interesting play, I think I focus on corners probably correctly as the primary pivots, but rarely adjust to seeing the game through the lens of active control and use of 5 and ability to play next to 5. And in positions like 1, 2, 3, 5, right, cards in those squares, it's pretty obvious 5 is the pivot. Corners tend to be pivots when there's the 2 open squares around them. After, say, a starter 1, then a move in 5, there's 2 and 4, those are paired squares, and they essentially pivot around 1, not so much around 5. 5 is something of a pivot, but 1 is kind of the key pivot of the position. Combo control of 1 is often more relevant, though less in closed because of how closed works different. But in open, I think 1 is often the kind of the critical square there. But if 1 of 2 or 4 are occupied, suddenly 1 stops being a real pivot. It might be being used when 2 or 4 are occupied, right? You might be using 2 because you have a combo back in 4 or the like. But often that's when it sort of loses its pivot status, right? In a position like 1, 2, 3, 5, it becomes pretty clear 5 is the pivot. Whoever has which cards can, change things, of course, and what rules are on. And in that last game, we saw 1, 2, 3, 5. And so 5 should be treated as the pivot. And if you don't have safe squares next to it, that can be very vulnerable. And Smoke's hand, by not having 10s left in the hand, he had already used both his 10s, was very susceptible to not having a max number and to having problems in a position where 5 was the pivot. And I think I undervalue those. My first loss, I believe, in open in the return was to Tezuka. And it was a move I made when I couldn't find a win and played a move I saw late and it didn't work. And if I had played the moves I'd been looking at the whole time, I wouldn't have lost. But I thought my move was reasonable. I thought it applied new pressure. I didn't see it was losing until Tezuka replied. So I may have played it out of time pressure and out of really trying to find a win, but I still really misevaluated it, and I continued misevaluating it throughout my opponent's turn. And it was very similarly because I had underestimated the power of kind of combos through 5. All right, it looks like Smokes will play in 2. I'm going to pause again to eat. Yum burrito bowl. All right, we've got a move. Smokes indeed does play 2. And yeah, so I'm thinking how to better identify where pivot squares are. Now, in an L formation, you basically have 1 move diagonal from the action. But here the pivot is kind of likely to be 6, right? If Seto plays, which card did I want to stick in 8? 8, 5, 6, 7, and 8, say? Which maybe, because that doesn't ever take 2. I don't know. Anyways, say you play 8, 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? You're clearly setting it up so that the game pivots around 6. Because your combo potential... Oh, actually, no, you do have 7, 8, 6, 5 for 5 as well. 8 is interesting. I bet he goes 8. I bet that's the plan here. God, Seto plays complicated games. So I guess the primary pivot 6, but maybe games aren't. Maybe this isn't a useful framework or a framework that's not going to apply to every game. But I think pretty clearly Seto has to be relying on combo potential here, right? If you're looking to play 8, 5, 6, 7, and 4 here and try to hold a tie there, I mean, you do you, but it's not going to work. I think you're just going to lose. Yeah, I think you're just going to lose. 6, 8, 7, 5, and 4 maybe has a little more hope. Maybe. I'm skeptical. I think your plan here has to be combo potential. You're down so much on board, and your cards aren't fantastic sweepers here. Even though 8, 7, 6, 5s are of course very good. So I think your plan is to set up high combo potential, and high combo potential tends to be based on having play around a specific pivot. So I do think this is actually a position where it's quite relevant. And I think 6 is the key card. Its combo power isn't strong enough that I think Seto has a win here, but it does look very possible to tie this. You know, a possible continuation is 8, 5, 6, 7 in 8, 9, 4, 3, 9 in 9, 7, 8, 6, 5 in 5. I guess that actually combos a whole lot. Maybe you have to block 5. I was thinking just 7, 8, 6, 5 in 4, but actually doesn't flip back 1. Oh, but that does tie because they didn't flip 3. Yeah. So there's probably ties there, but interesting game and interesting follow up on where the pivot is because it obviously isn't a corner in this game, right? And by pivot, I sort of mean a card around where combos based around this card are critical to control of the game, right? Here it's obviously not 9. 9 is blocked in. That's not the square being comboed. It's obviously not 1. 1 can be taken. It never combos anything else, right? The cards with potential for it to be here are 2 and 6. And I think 6 is the relevant one. 6 is the one where kind of diagonal setups apply to it more directly. So he's picked up a different card, but again, I would expect it to be going in 8. This also would set up combo in 9 with 7, 8, 6, 5, as well as combos in 5. So I'm expecting 8 because I think 6 is the pivot. 8 was played because maybe it is good that I mention when I pause and unpause, because when I unpause, I will be coming to the next move, and if you want to pause and have more time to think about each position, then I guess just pause when you see a new position is my advice, because I'm going to go back to eating, and there might be another move by then. Seto his last turn, so Smokes, even though his 7, 8, 6, 5 is of course very good in 5 and 9 as well, does not want to leave those two squares open. I think, yeah, fundamentally you do not leave those squares open. It may work. Maybe you can play like 9, 4, 3, 9 and 7, and if 8, 5, 6, 7 in 4, you have 7, 8, 6, 5 and 5. Maybe that works. In this case, it doesn't, but maybe something like that does. But I think you also you want to be checking first. Do you block 5 or 9? You certainly calculate 5 and 9 before any other moves. And my inkling is that this is difficult. Because I think actually here 8, 5, 6, 7 and 5 is a bigger threat than in my versions. This was a nice way to do it because that grabs 3 as well, but it doesn't grab 1. So for instance, if 9, 4, 3, 9 and 9, 8, 5, 6, 7 and 5, that flips everything except 1 and 9. And then you can play 7, 8, 6, 5 in 7, and you have a tie. Nothing's flipped. 16, 15, 13, 15. Yeah, nothing's flipped. And you have cards in 1 and 7, 8, 9. And if 9, 4, 3, 9, and 9, I'm glad I gave that as the main line against the other move, because I do think that's the main move here. If 7, 8, 6, 5, and 5, that flips everything but 3 and 9, right? It doesn't flip 3 because it doesn't combo through 6. And then you can play 7, 8, 6, 5, and 7 again. And again, you're going to have 4 cards. So I think 9, 4, 3, 9, and 9 is a tie. I'm not sure on other stuff. I think Seto's just huge combo potential here is enough that you're happy for a tie. And I also think you probably need to block 5 and 9. I would be surprised if any move in 6 or 4 or 6, 4 or 7 tied. Very possible it does, but it would be surprising to me. Of course, last game I was surprised by everything, so who knows. But this game, we're really focused on the pivot. We're going to cut off the pivot, and we can do so while being safe to it, right? When we play a 9, we're not weak to 6. We're not weak to the pivot, and we can make things work after. So I think 9, 4, 3, 9, and 9. I think you got to block one of the combo squares, and you got to do it in a way that gives you something, right? In a way that you're not weak to it. So the first 3 moves I'd check, I started with 9, 4, 3, 9. I'm going to go eat more, so I'm not going to look more. But the next 2 moves I'd check are 7, 8, 6, 5, and 5, and 4, 8, 9, 5, and 5. Again, trying to adjust from our mistakes of last game. All right, Smokes plays one of the other moves. He blocks 5. Now, because Smokes is a safe move in 9, there's no point of like 8, 5, 6, 7, and 4. Sure, that sets up a combo in 7 as well as 9, but Smokes blocks 9 safely and Smokes wins. And so because again, Smokes has a way to play safely in 9, combos there aren't that threatening. So Seto should combo. And he may have moved already because Seto is very fast. He can do so either way, but clearly the more tempting way is 7, 8, 6, 5, because that flips the extra card in 3. That's going to flip 3 cards. It's currently 8, 2. That makes it 5 to 5. And then Smokes is intending to play 7, 8, 6, 5, and 7, and 8, 5, 6, 7 can only capture 1 card. So it looks to me like Smokes has also managed a similar idea to the one I had. If Seto starts with 8, 5, 6, 7, and 9, he makes it 6, 4 in favor of Smokes, and Smokes can simply block 4 with 9, 4, 3, 9 to tie, and cannot play 7. 7 loses, but can block 4 with exactly 9, 4, 3, 9. Now, if Seto had a big setup in... Also worth checking if Seto can set up in 7, because if he can hold 7, 8, 6, 5 for 9 and has a threat in 4 with it, that could be devastating, but he doesn't have that. Seto goes with 8, 5, 6, 7, and Smokes will go with 9, 4, 3, 9. Very nicely held by Smokes. Really interesting game by Seto. That move in 1 is incredibly classy. Very creative, very interesting find. Really sees the game. Maybe just using pivots a lot better than I do. Yeah, really cool game. This one was really interesting, and I think led to a reasonable conclusion. Yeah, what a move in 1. I know I was too into what I was saying, but I think it fed into where I was going, because it created these really dangerous combo points, and that's something Seto does so well. Maybe also something to be said for the kind of what I think is the Akiyama thesis of it's okay to concede a key square as long as you have play when if they occupy it this turn, right? By playing in 1, you force 2, and if you think you have a big play there in 8, forcing 2 before 8 could be really advantageous rather than going 8 immediately. Really interesting game. Whenever they stop playing, I'm gonna pull out the solver and take a peek at these because they're very interesting. All right, we'll stop this one here.